Phil, you ready?
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Build a Theatre, a podcast charting the creation of a new theatre here in Brussels, Belgium. My name is Edward Macmillan.
And my name is Phil Wilcox.
And we're here today with our guest, who we're going to be announcing in a little bit. How are you doing today, Phil?
I'm fine, thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's not to be too British about it, but I'm going to talk immediately about the weather. It's wet. Oh my goodness, it's wet here in London, and we've got about 2 weeks of it. But you know what? We had such a great summer. I don't mind. It was my birthday a couple of days ago. I was spoilt rotten and working hard. But yeah, it's all good. How's life in Brussels, Ed?
Lovely. Happy 21st to you, Phil.
Once again.
Once again. Yes, it's very warm here. Very good. I guess this is the part where I need to tell you a little bit about what's happening with the bridge.
Oh, let's get straight onto it. Yeah. No,
let's get to it.
Why bother with why bother with the niceties?
Why bother with the pleaspleasantries?
Go on then. Tell me. You're obviously
meat.
gagging to tell me.
Yeah, there's so much excitement going on. No. I feel we are turning a corner from our little hiccup earlier in the summer, and I feel that we are getting back on the right track. So we have been spending our time basically looking at different venues here in Brussels. Not as venues for us to be permanently, but just as venues that we can actually show something, just as we did for our first production, Vincent River, back in November 2021, which we showed at a place called Full Circle, which is in one of the neighborhoods in Brussels. So we have been looking at various different options, exciting spaces, not all of them classical theatrical spaces. I'm a big believer that you can really do theatre anywhere. And for me, it's always a case of seeing if a venue can work logistically, as in, can we fit enough people in? Can they sit down? Are there toilets? Can we get the equipment in? Is there any equipment? Is there power supply? All these kind of questions. And then matching, if the answers to those questions are yes, then we can match the venue with a play, because not every play, not every production in my mind would fit into specific venues.
Yeah, toilets and power seem to be the big one, don't they, really, with that sort of... Because site-specific theatre is wonderful because it takes it out of theatre, and it's probably one of the easiest ways to get an audience to feel like they're really involved in a production, isn't it? You know, they're not sat in a red velvet seat looking at the Pross Arch with people beyond it. You're actually in the place. You're in the basement with them. You're in the haunted house or whatever. I don't know. Terrible examples. But yeah, when you find those places...
It is
sometimes
Halloween, Phil.
It's true. Very, very on point. But you find that place and you think, this is amazing. Oh my goodness, this is exactly where this production needs to be. Do you have toilets? Yeah, there's one toilet out back and the lock's broken. Right, great. Okay, power? Yeah, well, it was updated in the 1940s. So, oh, right, okay. We need a generator. We need porta potties, We need to bring it in.
Yeah. And annoyingly, that kind of stuff is really expensive. So it's important to have the basic amenities. We've actually also, one of the places we were looking at back in January, February, was this old supermarket. It had a toilet, but only had one, and for a theatrical space, really, to get everyone in and out, just logistically, in the interval or just before the show, you need more than one if you're talking about like 100 people.
That would be super cool, though, wouldn't it? A piece in an old supermarket, and you could stock the shelves with things related. I don't know, it would have to be quite a specific piece, but stock the shelves with related paraphernalia.
Yeah, so we're looking at a few different spaces, a few different productions. I would love all of my ideas to come to fruition, but I mean, hopefully we've got, I think, maybe 4 or 5 different options. So hopefully one of them will come to fruition. And now we're in the stage of basically negotiating with the different venues to see what is possible. Also, not only financially, also on the logistical side of things as well.
I guess one of the big things about what your permanent venue, the perma-ven, if you will, the perma venue, would have enabled you to do would be to have planned much further. And what this is now having to make you do again is actually just draw in, because I know you're a clever, ambitious chap, and you'll be thinking far in advance. But actually, this is having to make you fight fires which are much closer to you. I mean, fight fires maybe it's the wrong thing. Line up other stuff which is much closer in your vision, isn't it?
No, but you're right, Phil. And I ideally would like to be planning things a lot more in advance, if possible. But I think it's making sure that you're doing both simultaneously at the moment. So planning the short term things and we get them up and running. But I'm also already, talking to people about what we could do in 2024, even though we still don't have a venue. Maybe we will have a venue in September 2023. Maybe we won't. Who knows? I mean, it's there's a lot of unknowns that we're trying to play with at the moment.
And nothing focuses the mind like a deadline. We've got a production lined up in 2024. We need to find a venue for it. Where's that supermarket?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Just briefly, because obviously we've got to get Francesco on for our conversation with him in a moment. What you might not want to go into this, so this might not even make the episode. But along with the ups and downs of the Bridge as a company, as an entity, we know that through the podcast that this is obviously this is intrinsically your baby. This is something that's really close to your heart. How are you doing? We don't go down the full therapy route, but is it as part of this podcast, it was charting the ups and downs, the highs and the lows. So, what are your how are you doing emotionally through all this time?
Thanks, Phil, for the therapy question. Yes. I am okay. I think I also. I have ups and downs at the moment as well. I guess the first thing to say is that I'm in a very different position from this time last year, because I feel we have we have our core team for a start, who are kind of this support system and a way to bounce ideas off, and then you have the wider kind of support system of people who are kind of championing us and helping us to move forward just from a psychological sense. I think it was 2 weeks ago that we had me and Ava, my co-partner, were just having one of our weekly chats, and it was the first time, and we were talking about the different productions, different like options for which productions could go in which venues, and it was the first time that I was starting to get a little bit excited again since the setback back in June. So and that was that has spurred me on a little bit to be like, okay, like I see a tangible outcome here. I can see a direction of travel. I can see that it's not an impossible task, and that enables me to continue. And I also, for our what we're calling our weekend workshops, which is musical theatre workshops on Sunday mornings, I am leading the singing on that for this term, and that's also been really nice, actually doing the facilitation work directly, and I've been really enjoying that. So there are these like up moments, and I've been really really motivated to work. I think it's it's for me really the thing that plagues my mind at the moment is financial. Like always, we've been doing this voluntarily for the past year and a half, and that can't continue forever. So how do we make it work really on a longer term basis? And that's a question that we've always been asking ourselves, but we haven't quite managed to make work yet.
And it's not far, of course, from the life of a freelancer, isn't it? It's that doing that melting pot of the things that inspire you and give you fulfillment, but also the solvency, the fact that you also need to support yourself to make money and put food on the table unless you're independently wealthy. All topics we've had in the podcast before. And also we have... we read people sometime on this podcast and try and delve past the jargon. The fact that you have jumped back in doing something artistically involved, Ed, and you called it doing the facilitating. I'm sorry, we're going to have to go for coffee at some point and talk about that. But it also, the freelance lifestyle leads us on to our guest, doesn't it? Ed, do you want to introduce Francesco?
Yes, well, we've already mentioned his name twice, so that's a bit of a sneak peek. I guess he will also be advertised on the podcast episode anyway. With us this month we have Francesco Bianchi. He is based between Italy and Brussels, and he is a freelance director, a playwright, a writer in his own right, and also a translator. So welcome onto the show, Francesco.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you with us. I mean, I guess I don't know. Like as a freelancer, maybe I just want to start with this quick question, Phil, if I may. As a freelancer, do some of those things chime with you, which we were just talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, the coping with economical stuff, it's absolutely the first thing that we wake up with in the morning, I think. Because as a freelance, of course, you have to be your own boss. So it means that, of course, you have to create your own job, which is, of course, different. It's diverse, but it's always you have to be the first one chasing it. So I can completely relate with what you were saying.
It's true, isn't it? It sounds very true. I like this idea, Francesco, as well. You mentioned there that you wake up with the money worries, the economic worries, implying that by the time that you go to bed, hopefully you've done something to make a bit of money, but also that you've gone the full circle and you're back to being creative. You're back to sort of you've scratched your artistic itch in that day as well. You've done something that's felt truly sort of creative. Obviously, we know it doesn't always work like that in a 24-hour cycle, but it's a nice sort of analogy of it. And yeah, what you mentioned there about, of course, the pros and cons there. And again, it's very easy we talk about them. I suppose they're possibly quite easy to sort of understand and see from the point of view of someone who's, for example, full-time employed or just in another employment. But even justifying that to ourselves is quite tricky sometimes. That sort of, I've done it. It was a recent birthday of mine, as Ed said. It was my 21st birthday once again. And you not that I see these as great milestones, but you do sit down sometimes and you think, where am I? What am I doing? Am I happy with this? Fast forward 10 years' time. Do I want to be doing the same thing? Would I still be fulfilled? Would I still be happy? Comparing to someone else who's done 10 years in a company and progressed through the natural rungs of that ladder, or to someone else who's done an employment which has no progression, but they're perfectly happy with the fact that they're always just going to do this thing for 36 hours a week, which enables them to do everything else that they want to do in the other hour. It's it's an interesting sort of mental approach to things.
Well, I think it's very what I find very interesting is the fact that some people with which I talk, friends of mine or co-workers as well, which are not freelance, tend to not understand completely what it means to waking up. I always take this waking up example because it's basically the big difference between knowing what to do since when you wake up and inventing what to do. So what I find interesting is that as a freelance, of course, you are concerned. Of course, if you don't move, nothing moves in your job. You have to be the first one moving stuff, which is fatiguing sometimes. But my opinion is that actually, when you do it, when you start doing it, you always get creative. So the concerns are like, I mean, I'm Italian and we always have these coffee things. Like the first thing you do in the morning is make your own coffee. And then after the coffee, you can start being creative. And the fact that you don't have a proper like occupation like every day, 36 hours a week, but you have loads of them. That's what I find interesting because you have... you kind of invent your own job for the day or for the week or for the project. So I find it quite exciting. Also, if it's maybe more difficult in the sense of tranquility, in the sense of serenity, of knowing what to do. But I like not to know what to do. I kind of chose it, and it's I think it nurtures my mind.
You've got to be brave with that as well, haven't you? Because I feel that if I'm not doing something, that means my career's stagnant, and that's a tricky one to get over. But sometimes actually taking the holiday, going off, relaxing, resting, making sure that you have time to dream the ideas so that eventually you can wake up, make the coffee and get on with work. is healthy. Oh, what a lovely bit of therapy on a Thursday morning we're having.
But everything you say, Phil, also does apply to the world of work, the world of full-time work as well. People think that they need to be working and doing all the time, but actually taking this time to dream is also really important in full-time employment as well. Francesco, since you mentioned your many different jobs, perhaps you would like to just delve into that a little bit and tell us what kind of things you get up to on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, and how you got into this weird and wacky world of theatre.
Yes, absolutely. I will try to be brief with that, but I don't know if I will manage that. Anyway, well, basically, first of all, I'm a playwright. I started doing theater as a playwright, so I started writing for theater after my studies. I did academic studies, so as a dramaturg, as a knower of theater. And then I started writing when I was 22, 23. And I of course, I went to theater many times per month, and it's always been my first passion.
As a kid, you didn't write, so you only really started at 22, 3.
Oh, well, actually, I think I can say that I started when I was 22, 23. I didn't write before. I studied very much, but I didn't put myself into the writing until some point. Then after the studying, I decided that I wanted to try it and to see if I was able to do kind of the same thing that I was studying with the great writers. Of course, I did my undergrad dissertation was on Samuel Beckett, and he's been my reference for many years, and I really went into what was the dynamics of his writing, of his investigating characters, actions, situations, and I kind of said, okay, let's give it a try. Let's try to do the same thing. Of course, not thinking I was like Beckett, but since I studied the process, I wanted to get into the process as well. And then I started writing. I started going to theater to see rehearsals. I met some directors, and I started to work also as an assistant director, which leads me to my second job, which is to direct plays. And then the third thing, let's put it into three things. So I'm a playwright, director, and translator. And at some point, while I was working, I happened to work for many years into a very important theater in Italy, which is called Fondazione Teatro 2, which is in Parma, between Bologna and Milan. And I worked there as assistant director, dramaturg. I also worked into communication. So I kind of went into the full life of a theater. So I could follow productions from the idea to the choosing of the cast, and then rehearsals, and then how to communicate a show. So this was very important for me because I could enter into the life of a production. So I spent time with the actors, I spent time with the director. The same old job, like from bringing the coffee to everything else. And at some point,
you were the office intern of the theatre.
Exactly. But in a theater, which is magic, so it was my dream job. So actually, I didn't feel the tiredness because I really liked what I was doing, and I don't want to say that it's not difficult to work in a theater, because I think every job is difficult and can be at least challenging. But I really liked it, so I really put myself into it. And at some point, I was in a chat with the artistic director of Teatro 2 in Parma, and they were talking about a new production. It was a production of Misery, taken from the Stephen King's novel, in the adaptation of William Goldman. And they were talking about the fact that they were thinking about the production, but they couldn't think about it properly because they didn't have it translated into Italian because they were still looking for a translator. And so I said, if you need, I could do a very rough translation just for you to read it so that you can have an idea. And they said, okay, try it if you want. And so I kind of translated it really, really quickly in 3 or 4 days. And then I gave it back. They read it and they said, we like the translation, so probably we will use your translation. So I was officially a translator, like by chance in a way. And then, of course, I had to work on the translation more and more because I wanted to. I mean, it was a really rough draft, but that's how I started because I actually took a text, took a piece of theater writing, and I had to make it immediately comprehensible for someone who was not really into English language. Of course, everybody speaks English as a second language here, but in different levels. So I had to make it comprehensible. And this kind of job led me to saying, well, actually, I could do it as a job. So here comes my third job.
I mean, really interesting that you just fell into it and discovered it, I guess, through working in other aspects of the theatre. And you're not the first person we've interviewed who that has happened to, actually. I would like to, though, delve a little bit backwards also and just ask you, why did you decide then to study dramaturgy in the first place? What was your connection to theatre?
Well, I think as many people here in Italy, I started doing theater as a non-professional, so like with the local town theater company. And the very first experience I have, apart from going to the theater and see shows with my family, I come from a very little town near Rome. So for us to go to the theater meant to take the car, drive for 40 minutes, arrive to Rome. So it's not, I didn't have a proper access to theater in my hometown. And of course, I liked theater, but I didn't know very much what it was about. So as a non-professional, the first time I said, I really want to do this job is when I first saw a rehearsal. So the process of making theater instead of just watching it as an audience. When I saw that, I said, I don't know how, but I want to work in these fields. I was 17, 18. And so I started doing theater in this non-professional company as an actor. At some point while I was studying literature, comparative literature. So I had a much more academic approach to theater and theatrical literature. I said, okay, as an actor, I was still doing things as a non-professional actor. So it kind of came to me the idea that I would have to make a choice, like if I wanted to continue with the acting career, or at least to try to start it, or to do something else. And I said, probably I will never feel really sure as an actor, sure of my talent, if I have one, and maybe this is something I could not cope with, like not being sure that I am good at it. Also because many, I think 99%, maybe 100% of actors in Italy are freelance, and always looking for a call, waiting for a call from a theater. So I said, if I am not sure of my talent, I will never be completely, I will never sleep good. So I said, okay, let's see if I can do something else. Not because I wanted to be an actor and I was not brave enough, but because it kind of didn't feel like the right thing to do. So I started writing and I said, okay, at the very moment I started writing something, and I took two of my friends and I said, could you read it, please? Can we just, pretend that we are doing it? And it was good. Not good in the sense that it could be produced, but it was something I really felt like mine. So I said, okay, I want to, this is the field of theater I want to fit in. And then the direction came right after that, because while I was writing, and then I discovered that in order to write well and also to translate well, you have to know actor, you have to know how they work. These words have to be said and not read, actually. So to have a relationship with human beings that have to act to enable emotions and dynamics and conflicts to be on stage and to be visible to the audience, I really had to know the practice. So I said, okay, let's go back to rehearsals. Let's go back to theaters, not only in my room writing, but trying to enhance my writing with that. And so I came to be an assistant director and more recently a director myself. Um, and curiously, translating for me came right as it happened with writing, because translating meant, okay, now I'm actually writing something, because it will be a different play. It was the same play but in another language, so different actors, different pronunciation, different words sound differently, so you have to find the right thing. And so that's how, I mean, I basically love the fact that someone can write something, stage something, and then there will be other human beings playing it, probably living it, and other human beings watching it and probably hopefully enjoying it. So it's a really simple relationship with theater for me, because it's basically, as Peter Brook said, it's basically someone doing something and someone else watching it.
It sounds like how you describe it anyway. It sounds like a really kind of natural growth process of going through, and you've just been. What's lovely is that you've obviously just been open enough, to your own thoughts and feelings throughout, that it's sort of guided you. And obviously, sometimes we don't necessarily know that that's what's going on in the moment, but with hindsight, you look back and you go, oh yeah, that was kind of what I was feeling. I'm not experienced enough in this in order to do that thing which I really like, but I don't think it's that I want to do, so I'm going to look at something else. It's a really lovely way forward.
Yeah, no. It's just that actually, I mean, I think it's kind of, I mean, for me, it's funny what happened to me, and so I wanted just to share it with you guys. It's that basically I said, when I was deciding, when I was doing the non-professional acting, I said, will anyone tell me if I am good enough to be a professional or not? Probably no one will take the responsibility to tell me go on or stop. And so I couldn't feel sure enough to do that. So I said, okay, maybe I want to be, at some point, I want to be someone who can actually give the right advice also to a young actor or a young writer or a young director. So I want to know more. Instead of I want to do more, I want to know more in order to do. So that's why at some point I switched from I want to be on stage and I want my things to be on stage together with other people. So it's more, it's less narcissistic and more sharing, because I my experience, and apparently it's not only my experience, is that sometimes it's a narcissistic idea that wants to that leads us to the stage, and of course it is, and there's in my opinion there's a healthy part of it. But at some point for me was like, okay, if I am doing it just for myself, just to tell myself I'm good enough or not, I'm not giving anything to the audience. To It's not a job. It's just something I do for myself, and I don't want to be like that. So writing, and then directing, and then translating is more like sharing for me. It's more something that concerns being with other people, working with other people, and feeling other people in a way.
That's a really nice way to put it, Francesco. Actually, wanting to share your passion and share everything, and that's also how I feel about running a theatre. It's about sharing rather than this narcissistic view of things. You kind of mentioned it already a little bit, but I'd like to delve into how you go about, what is your process of translating. You say it's quite almost like writing a play itself, but how do you actually approach a play when you get a text and you need to translate it?
Well, there are two things I would like to say. One is more intellectual, and I will leave it for the second part. And another one is much more from the heart. From the heart, I would say that my approach to a text is that I have to fall in love with it. So basically, I read a text, I read a play, and I kind of some plays for me are more some plays work better for me than others. So when I find a play that it's actually, moving something in me, then I say, okay, that's the first thing. I have to be moved, and not because I decide if the text is good enough. It's to see if I am good enough to feel it and to understand it. So, and then basically I would say that I approach it like page to page. So first page, let's see, I read it through first time a couple of times. I read the whole play a couple of times. I take some very simple notes, and then I just start because I try not to be haunted by too many things. For example, registers of language or technical advices which are written in the play. I try to put them away for the moment and just focus on the lines, which are the most important things in general in spoken theater, let's say. Um, so yeah, my process is this one. I just read it through, and then I just go page to page and word to word, and I try to find coherences between the lines of a same character, for example. And I say it's like writing because sometimes in the process of translation from one language to another, I just translate from English and into English. So I don't know many languages, but in general, you have to invent what is maybe a dialect in English or a slang. You have to kind of find, a similar thing that could work for an Italian audience. So it could refer to completely different things. So someone from, I don't know, Yorkshire can be. I have to decide if I want to invent a dialect, invent a language, or to find a dialect which comes from, I don't know, Puglia, for example. Sometimes it works, sometimes I cannot do that. I try to know the author uh, the most, uh, yeah, the more I can. So I try to read other plays by the same author. I try to see if there are staged productions of the play. So I do some research before starting, but then at some point I have to empty my mind and try to say, okay, that's me, the words of the text, and the language of arrival. So I try to be more free when I translate, and then to correct it after I finished. The intellectual thing I was about to say is a very boring thing, but it really helpful for me. Is I say that translating is like writing because I come from a Marxist school in which Walter Benjamin wrote something which is, I think, the most important thing about translating, which is if we imagine the work, like the play or a book or whatever, as a circle, the translator is a line that touches the circle. So there are an infinite number of possible translations that touch the work. So as a translator, I always try not to be uh, ultimate. I know that my translation will be one translation of a work which is much more complex than that. So that's why I kind of, and of course, I have to touch the play, and then it has to go somewhere else. So in that sense, I kind of write it again because, of course, I will have to invent some words. I have to invent some dialects. I have to invent some situations. Always trying to be the most faithful I can to the play because, of course, I'm not the author in that case.
I've got so many questions, Francesco, about it's certainly the specifics of English to Italian and Italian to English, vice versa, because it just sort of sparks my mind up because I'm largely in the world of opera, and obviously we sing a lot in translation. I was going to ask you why it's important to translate to the vernacular of a particular country. But I might side that question because I think because this whole podcast is about an English language theatre in Brussels, between Ed and myself, we've kind of put our things. If you've got more to say, then go for it. But I just think in terms of the nitty gritty of Italian to English and stuff like that, you've described it as a process and it's ongoing. It's like a living thing, so it's never going to be that set piece, which is never going to move. but Italian famously has so few words in comparison to English. And then you talk about things like dialect. Now, of course, the English dialect is wildly different. Someone from Liverpool speaks wildly different to someone from London, someone from Cornwall to someone from Scotland, Wales, Ireland, hugely different. And also those dialects feed into that character as well. Italy's got the same, someone from Sicily, someone from Puglia, like you say, Naples, Rome. These people are going to speak differently. But just to the actual words themselves, there are, where in English we might have tons of adverbs and adjectives, descriptive words on how someone says something or does something. Whereas Italian is much more straightforward, isn't it? Do you invent new words, or how do you do it?
It depends. I mean, it's a very complex thing because it's not only. I mean, your question is very punctual, and it's probably the most important problem a translator has. But how I try to solve this problem. First of all, being humble and trying not to find an answer, find a solution for a problem, but to make it work in a way, which could work for this production because of these actors, because of this director, because of this production, and not as an universal thing. That's the first thing. But then the dialects and the words, I maybe invent a word, but I use a very ancient word in Italian that comes from the medieval times sometimes. But the fact is, what is important for me is that a dialect or a slang or a character that who comes from Ireland, for example, or Scotland or Australia or Argentina, it's not only a slang. It's always because of something. There was there's this amazing book by James Shapiro. It's about Shakespeare. And at some point he says, there's a reason why every lawyer in Shakespeare's theater is from Naples. There's a reason why every young man in love is from Florence. So, and in opera, I think it's kind of some characters of opera comes from these kind of schemes. So in a way, I try to match what is, for example, a slang in the English language with a reason. Sometimes the registers of language don't come only from a geographical problem, but from a class difference. So someone who comes from an upper class speaks differently from someone who comes from a poor background, for example. And then, starting from that, I have to do loads of research. I had to live in England to understand most of what I read in English now. So I kind of had to live it in a way. And then I try to invent it or to reproduce it in the Italian language and writing. And sometimes I have to use notes, not only lines, not only, word for word, but I have to put some little notes to make it understandable for an Italian director, actor, spectator, why this character talks like that in a dialect or talks in a slang or talks or is evidently from another part of Italy. And sometimes, yes, I have to invent words. I have to say, usually I invent words when I translate contemporary texts. So when I don't have historical references. If I have an historical reference, I always try to use it.
Surely, you look at a work and you think, right, I respect this playwright. Like you said, you've fallen in love with it. How, not slavish, but how devoted to the original do you feel you have to be? I assume it falls down a divide somewhere. How devoted to the original text do you feel you have to be, but then knowing you have to marry it to the vernacular, to something that it gets understood? And I guess as an example of that, maybe, is how do you translate jokes?
Just to maybe follow up on that, because that's basically related to my question. Less how do you do it, but what do you mean? You said try to be faithful, and obviously that's what you try to do. Try to be faithful to the author. But what does that really mean in your book?
Well, okay, I'll try to answer the whole bunch of questions. First of all, in Italian, there's a very funny joke, and I will do a translation joke now. I'll have to explain a joke, which is in Italian, to translate is tradurre. In Italian, to betray is tradire. Tradurre and tradire are almost the same word. So to betray something when you're translating it is kind of, biologically in the fact of translating it. So of course you feel like you are betraying something, of course. So when I say try to be faithful, it means that of course I will have to be devoted to the text, and I will have to trust the author, in the sense that if he or she wrote something in that way, I have to um, trust the fact that there's a reason for that. So I cannot put, as long as I cannot put my interpretation on it, but I have to trust why he or she did it, wrote that. So I have to put myself in the second place, not in the first place as a translator. So in that sense, I say I have to be faithful. So I have to put him or her before me in the scale of importance. So even if something would work better for me, I still have to analyze why this person, this writer, wrote that. And of course, sometimes for example, when you translate from a living author, you have the chance to write to them and ask, can you explain me, or can you help me understanding? And most of the times the authors are amazing in that, because they really help. But when you can't, it's tricky. So you have to make a choice whether you use what works better for you as a translator, or it's not always possible to make everyone happy. That's the thing. So when I say I try to be faithful, it means that I try to um, put myself not in the first place, but in the second place. The author has to be the first thing. How do I translate a joke? Well, that's tricky. It's very tricky, because it's not only the jokes, not only the words, it's also the humor that changes. So sometimes something which is absolutely hilarious in English doesn't work in Italian, or and sometimes that's almost the only space in which I take some freedom, because sometimes whether of course I try not to um, modify the sense, but sometimes I have to make another joke. So, for example, I have probably to explain what I want to say. I need an example, and I will use Misery, this play I translated, which is basically going back on stage next week in Parma. So Misery is a perfect example. We have one character, very cultivated. He's a writer, very famous one, American, um, and he's rich. He's spoiled. He's very good at his job. And then we have Annie, um redneck, hillbilly, Midwest, not cultivated. Very, she speaks directly, without synonyms, without metaphors, just goes for it. At some point, she wants to make a compliment to him, saying, "Oh, what you wrote was very good," and she wants to make a compliment which is understandable by him. So she wants to say, um, "You did a masterpiece like the Sistine Chapel," but she cannot remember the name of the guy who painted the Sistine Chapel, which is Michelangelo. Uh, and so in the English text, in the English play, she says, "Oh, you did something really amazing, like that thing that there's a word that the American people use to every Latin ethnicity, Mexican, Argentinian, Italian, Greek, like
Hispanic, spick.
no, it's something. No, it's like Lando, Mando, something like that.
Okay.
I know it's like
Latino?
it's Mando, I think, because they kind of, but it's just a Midwest thing. It's not even in the proper English. And so she says, "Oh, you did a masterpiece. Your work is like the Sistine Chapel by that guy Mando," which of course has many meanings. It means that she doesn't even divide between Mexican people, immigrants in America, and Italian from the Renaissance. So how do I translate that? It's impossible to translate that, because I cannot translate the American Midwest 80s racism that some redneck Americans had towards everyone who was generically Latin, speaking something which could be Spanish or Italian or whatever. So I had to make a completely different joke. So I had to put in Annie's words, do you know the Ninja Turtles? I had to put in the Ninja Turtles because it was the only way in which I could deliver the fact that she was referring to something absolutely not cultivated, trying to make a compliment, resulting completely inefficient and insufficient to him, and also insulting. It's not the best solution. It was the best I could do after 1 week of research. So sometimes to translate jokes, it can be really tricky.
But it makes sense because and it speaks to the idea of translating into the vernacular. You want people in that theatre to have an experience as close to possible, and what you're doing is actually very respectful to the original writer because you're trying to create an experience. They're not going to have that experience if you just slipped in the word Mando. It's not going to make any sense. It's going to be something about it. It's going to be. It's not going to work. But so by translating that joke as you did means that it's as close to the original sense feeling of the audience gets that the original writer wanted.
Yeah, in that case, I have to add one very important thing that in that case, I had the luck to be in rehearsal so I could explain to the director and to the actors why I did that. So I think for a translator, I think this is very important. I think that everyone who's producing something which involves a translation should involve a translator as the most time possible because sometimes a translator doesn't have the chance to of course a text should work without the living word of a translator, but not always it's possible. So in that sense I was lucky because I could be there and explain that, and the director can decide. I'm also, as a translator, I'm also very respectful of the fact that maybe a director could say, okay, this is a good idea, but I prefer not to use it, and I prefer to stick to the original text. So a translator should always be faithful to the writer, but also to the living thing that will be the show. We are not intellectuals in this way. We have to be open to, everything has to be said and delivered. It's not something we can do as academics.
You mentioned that you sometimes have contact with authors who are living if you need some advice. I mean, do they get involved? Are they interested, or do they just kind of let you do what you need and only respond if you need help?
Well, to answer this question, I have to say that at the moment I'm working not only as a translator by myself, but also in a couple with very important translator in Italy. She's called Monica Capuani, and she gave me the chance to work with her. And especially with her, I'm working on translations of living authors. And I have to say that in general, my experience until now is that in general, authors are very happy that someone is translating their texts because they know that probably a different audience will, enjoy their plays. So in general, they are very, very available to give answers and to, in general, when someone, and I think I can say that also as an author, if someone would ask me questions about my play, and if I detect that these questions come from, something, a curiosity and not a criticism, I will always be very happy to help them. So I've always received very good help from the authors in general. So I wouldn't imagine a writer being nasty about that, because I think it goes against their interests. So in general, my experience is that everyone has always been extremely good with us.
So you mentioned you're doing some translation in this duo at the moment. It'll be interesting also to hear what other projects you have lined up in currently or in the next months, just to get a flavour of your life for our listeners.
Yeah, I'm writing a new play rehearsing one of my old plays for this competition and translating text. That's what I'm doing. Oh yes, and of course, I had to mention that I will be back in Brussels in a week actually, because I'm also rehearsing a play with a non-professional company I'm working with in Brussels, and so I'm also rehearsing with them, and I see them once a month, 1 week per month in Brussels. So I'm back and forth.
Amazing. It's brilliant that you're so busy, Francesco, and it's been really great to chat with you today. Very cryptic about this play by a British playwright that you're translating. We've skirted over that.
Yes. Let's keep the hype up.
Yeah, that's right.
For now.
Well, it's wonderful.
Francesco, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Yeah, it's been great to chat with you.
Oh, thank you guys. Really, it's been amazing. I have to say, it's not so common for us to talk about our job in this way. So thank you for giving the chance for us to talk about it, because I think it's always very interesting, or at least it is for us. So let's hope it's also for other people. But it's not that common. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
And thanks, Phil, and thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be back next month.
Bye.
Thank you, Francesco. Yes, good. We still want to know what the play is, but I doubt you're going to.
Yeah.